I want to welcome everybody to the show, and we have a guest calling in from Berlin, and her name is Shimrit Natif, and she is a mindset leader to help people have successful lives. So I want to welcome you to the show, and we're going to dive into her path in her career and how that relates to the world today, and welcome.
Thank you very much, John. I'm so happy to be here.
Finally got connected, and this is a very interesting space for me because I've been in comedy and entertainment for a long time, and it's interesting to see how, creativity, you being in the music business and what you're doing now, how that goes hand in hand. Tell me a little bit about how you got here.
Well, these were and are two separate paths, you could say, but of course they do go hand in hand, and one thing led to another, obviously. But yes, I am a musician, and that was my career for over 20 years. So I got into music in my very early days, and I devoted myself to that path and to that art and to that practice and mastery. And I became a professional musician and a music teacher as well. And well, there's a lot that I can share about those years and my path there. But as you're asking what led me to be where I'm at today, fast forward almost 20 years, I reached a point where I felt that there is, another gift that I always knew was there that was kind of calling me and asking to be unwrapped and shared. And that is the gift of what I do today and how what I bring to the world today and to people. And in some ways, it's similar, being a teacher with music and using music as a language to connect and to heal and to open hearts and to expand the mind. Music can do all of that. And it has done this for myself. And I believe that I've managed to create some sort of an impact on a couple of people through my music at the time. But another gift that I always knew I had and a desire that I always had was to really connect with people in other ways, maybe deeper, more personally, and help them really express who they truly are. And create freedom for themselves and whatever that may mean for someone. And so that passion grew stronger, and it reached a point where I had to let go of my music career and put it aside and to really devote myself to this new path and new art. And this led me eventually to where I'm at today. Fast forward a few other years.
Yeah.
Well, leading a community and Yeah,
the reason I asked that is, when you think about creation, a lot of people don't realize color and sound is part of creation. And, what I've gone through my enlightenment is what I feel. So what have you felt internally to kind of push you this direction? And I know we use these kind of softening words to kind of set up, maybe what's going on inside to the public, if you will, because it's a very fine line of a narrative, translating maybe what you feel, to someone else. You understand what I'm saying? What is that like?
That was a very emotional process, actually. The end of that period where I was still touring with my music and, hustling to make that career happen externally and internally, it reached a point where I just didn't want to go on tours. So I was touring at the time, mostly on my own, carrying a lot of heavy equipment around, airports and trains and such in Europe. And it's not easy, it's not an easy path at all. And I was very determined. So I'm not, I didn't shy away from the effort that was required. And that's why I actually did not understand what was the resistance that was coming up, because, I've always been a very massive action taker and, but I had a lot of resistance. And every time I had to go out on tour, it got tougher and tougher. And the last tour I went on, I remember I was literally crying while packing my stuff to go the next morning, really feeling an inner resistance very, very strongly. And in the morning, I got up and I got myself, all ready for it and, shifted my energy to make it possible to go. And I got on the train and I got to the airport only to realize that I'm in the wrong airport. So Berlin used to have 2 airports. Now it has only one, but it had 2 airports at the time. And I got into the airport realizing that, and I just sat on my suitcase crying like a little girl, literally calling my mom. I felt so depleted, so discouraged, so it was just like the end of the road. And I couldn't make it to the flight on the other side of town in the other area. And that was it. And I'm like, I'm not doing this ever. I can't do this. This is like, I really felt like I was, moving through the resistance in a way that was not, I wasn't really listening, to my soul, to life seeking expression through me, to the creative flow, really. And yeah, I canceled all the gigs in that tour. I didn't try to make it to the next one or anything like that, even though it was actually a nice tour. And I got home and I was like, okay, I'm not making any more bookings. I canceled everything I had, and I wasn't sure what I'm going to do next. I knew it was something to do with what I mentioned before, but I really didn't know what that would look like, what would be, asked of me by life to do next. And it was a period of a lot of asking and meditating and tuning in and working, with tools that I had already to create not only music, but myself and my expression in other ways as well. And I was really asking for guidance, and it came through dreams, other insights. And so for your question, it was a very emotional process to transition. I was all into my music career. It's 20 years,
Yeah.
So it wasn't an easy decision, right? I gave it everything I had, and I fought very hard, and it was my identity. It was my source of income. It was everything except for me being also a mother and a few other hats that I would wear. But that was really the main thing. I was all into that path. So
When you
yeah.
feel like you're being pushed, in a way, it's kind of odd, because I never thought I would be on camera or do a podcast. And when I started talking about this material of what I feel and talking to the different, healers and people around the world, it's very interesting, because it's just, you're like, I didn't think I was going to go that way, but it's like a force behind you pushing you somewhere. And you're like, shit, how did I get here?
Yes.
And then here's what I'm struggling with right now is I'm seen as this leader in comedy, and I've kind of stepping back from a lot of personal management, because a lot of people in entertainment have a lot of mental health issues, especially entertainers. And I don't think that's addressed enough in the business. So now when you step out, as people know your face as this music person, and then you step into this whole new narrative, did you have apprehension? And how did you get that first piece of narrative out there with this new path?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I wasn't very, preoccupied with that, to be honest. Maybe more in my personal life, personal relationships, my parents, my family, things like that. But all this happened. So when I started putting myself out there as I do today, it was COVID. So I started this before COVID. But when I really got online and started talking online and, putting myself out there publicly, it was right when COVID started. That was a very big shift for all of us, right? So I think it kind of blended in that. I went online, I started talking about COVID. For me was not difficult, thankfully. I mean, the period itself, I wasn't scared. I was just me and my husband and my son. We were just hanging out at home, homeschooling. And just letting it pass by us. We didn't really get too involved with it. So I really felt the calling to speak up about that and to really bring, that calming voice and that sane voice, if you ask me, about everything that was going on. So it kind of blended in that way. Everybody's lives changed anyway, right? Even if I was still a musician performing, I would have stopped at that point, because that's what we all had to do. So I think, yeah, when I never asked myself this question, or I was never asked this question that you just asked me, but I think COVID played a role in that, I guess.
Now, what do you feel? What is your instincts? What's your abilities? What is there? What's the substance there that you feel that really resonates with you internally?
What do you mean? Like, what are my abilities?
I mean, I could go a little deeper, right?
Yeah,
you said you said you're what, originally from Israel? And I know a lot of people in Israel, and I have a few friends there, Brian Wallace, who's in the business community in Jerusalem and stuff. And there's always this debate, right? I think the biggest battle on the planet is bloodline. What do you think about having Hebrew bloodline? And do you think there's a Jewish sector that doesn't have the Hebrew bloodline?
I love your questions, John. I don't have, it's more I find it, for me, what is most interesting for me as a Hebrew is the Hebrew language specifically. And I actually use that a lot in my contemplations and my own self-discovery or truth discovery, my own study, and in my teachings. When I teach, what I discover, I bring in there. And I think a lot about the Hebrew language, and it's a very ancient language, one of the most ancient languages, right? And it reveals so much truth and wisdom. All languages do, actually. All the languages that I understand 3, and they all reveal a lot of truth and wisdom in different ways. But Hebrew, being a very ancient language and also being constructed in the specific way that it is, it does that truth revealing in a different way than other languages. For me, I'm not even though I am from Israel, I've lived there for 36 years before I moved to Germany 8 years ago. And all my family's there. Still, I don't feel very like bloodline, very, very connected. I actually always wanted to leave Israel and live somewhere else. But the language, the Hebrew language, is something that is very, I feel very connected to. If I think that there are other Jewish people, or there are a sector of Jewish people that are not, I don't know. I don't have any much strong opinions about that, to be honest.
Because I think you have the Hebrew bloodline, because I can feel it. If I speak to someone, it's kind of weird to say, but if I speak to someone that has a Hebrew bloodline, I can feel energy starts coming out of my right hand.
Really? Even if they are not Israelis?
But I've spoken to people who are from Israel who claim to be Jewish, but I know they don't have the Hebrew bloodline because I don't feel it.
Okay. I get more and more what you're saying. That's interesting.
You know what I mean? And I think that for you to have the feelings you have, you must have the Hebrew bloodline.
So what else can you say about that Hebrew bloodline that you can identify so specifically?
Well, I'm Native. I have Native American on both sides, right? Cherokee. And I think that basically we're the same people, because Cherokees were identified as natives and so forth, but their language is very similar to Hebrew.
Really?
Yes, very similar to
Hebrew.
Hebrew.
I didn't know that.
And I was told by a person who could go back through the Akashi records that my bloodline was from John the Baptist. So I have a theory. There's a place, if you look at the beginning of creation, the Precambrian era, and I think there's four creation locations in the 4 quadrants of the earth. And if you look at where I'm from, where the Blue Ridge Mountains are, the Blue Ridge Mountains was the most developed area during the Precambrian era. And then you take where Atlantis was supposed to be, and then how the landmass was then. You have that kind of in the middle there. And if you look at Blue Ridge Mountains, then you have the other quadrant of the world where there was creation as well. So when the Great Flood came, right, in the middle of the Atlantic, it kind of split. And I think that bloodline went both ways. And I think that hasn't been identified properly. America's kind of hidden this, I think, information. And so you had people going to the east, you had people going to the west. The people who were split after the Great Flood went to the west, were the same bloodline with the people who went to the east. And that's all I can gather, because when I was told that, I was like, either this person's full of shit and trying to hustle me for money, or if it's true, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And I thought that potentially the bloodline came here, but I just think it's the same bloodline that got split went to different locations after the Great Flood, because that just makes more sense and geographically aligns. So I think that in the midst of this perpetuation of time, I think there is a certain maybe civilization, entities, whatever you want to call them, morph themselves under the Jewish religion that didn't have the Hebrew bloodline. And I think that creates a conflict internally in that world that's not being discussed.
That is so interesting and can really explain the horribly deep conflict there is in the Jewish people that is forever in conflict within themselves. I'm not even speaking about the conflict they have with other
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where that comes from, because I think that's the biggest battle for God on earth is the bloodline. And I think with the new frequency of the earth that we're moving into, the 5D frequency, I think that the low-level entities some of these people might get left behind, and people like yourself and other people around the world are ascending to this new position. And I think you're ascending because of your Hebrew bloodline.
Thank you for sharing that with me. I'm going to look much more into that after our conversation.
Yeah. So when you talk about that and you talk about the energy, because I never thought, sometimes if I'm around somebody, like I can do distance healing, I can project energy from like 10 feet away through like your heart chakra or your crown chakra or your hand chakras. I can give energy through. Some people can receive more. So when you help people, and I know you've worked, said your mentor was Bob Proctor.
One of them.
How did like Bob Proctor and Dr. Dispenza, is that how it says his name? Joe Dispenza?
Joe Dispenza.
How did these people resonate with you on this path? Because to me, I'll say something else. I think that the science narrative and the quantum field are two different things, because science only uses two parts of law of attraction to determine answers for humanity. They don't use the third part. And that's, to me, you only using those two parts created a realm of physics that's not accurate. So when you add the third part, and that's the melding block of the world, the quantum field is the real realm of physics. How does these guys' narratives relate to you being a pure source? And how do y'all adjust that and use that to help people? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, these are really two different teachers, Bob and Dr. Joe. Bob is not at all into science. Dr. Joe is a scientist and is a very spiritual person that is using his scientific tools and experience to explain more and more of spirit and truth. So I haven't had this conversation with him directly, but from what I know of everything that he speaks and teaches and what I'm receiving from him, I am sure that he doesn't believe that he has completed his task of explaining it all through science. I find that his gift or one of his gifts is to do that, though, right? To bring more and more. Most of the people and us as a culture, we rely on physical evidence for the most part. Most people do, right? And science has received such a role in defining reality for us and what is right and what is truth and what is false, and how everything works, that most people need that evidence and that explanation and that foundation to believe. And so I think it is so important to bridge that gap and close it more and more and more, and to bring that evidence to people so they can believe in their power as creators and as their own healers, and understand more what reality really is and what possibilities there are, and to rise within themselves, to heal their bodies, to free themselves. So I think that's the great gift of Dr. Joe. And with Bob, he's a very different teacher, and his greatest gift is his generosity and kindness. He passed away in 2022. And his devotion to his teachers. I have never seen a teacher and a leader like Bob Proctor, who has given all the credit and all the time he had to share his ideas to his teachers. Everything he taught was taking his listeners and his students and his followers back to the great teachers that he learned from in the books that he had studied. And he was just an inspiring leader because he was an inspiring student and follower. And that's a lot of what I received from him. But none of these schools, if you will, explain the truth and the quantum field to the fullest, for sure.
Because we could predetermine our lives.
Oh, yeah.
That's something I talk about too, is like when I talked to Marie Diamond, who's a very big name in feng shui, and I've talked to neuroscientists who can admit to this. Neuroscientists will admit to it because they know how the brain functions. They'll admit to science only uses two parts of law of attraction. When you talk about your environment and you talk about your foundation is your non-conscious. And we don't talk enough about your non-conscious. And I don't know if I don't see a lot of narrative, right? But there's a lot of information just in your non-conscious. So this is something I came up with, is if you understand your environment and you understand your non-conscious and you understand when your birth date is, to realign humanity using the 4 pillars of feng shui. So if I understand where someone's going to be born and I understand that this is their birth date, I know their directions of success. I know their directions for health. I know their directions for relationships. That is already predetermined, right? That is your 2 parts of law of attraction. That's predetermined. So if we're going to, this is where I can use science against themselves. So if we're going to only use 2 parts of law of attraction, let's talk about environment and non-conscious, and let's align these people based on their birth date and head them in the right direction, right? So we're not putting a round peg in a square hole. That's the first alignment. Then we go to the 3rd part of law of attraction, and let's address your sensibilities. Abilities can be defined through percentages if you understand what sensibilities does through your programming of your subconscious. If we can align someone the right way, we already have that information, which we're not doing. Now we're going to walk them through life and show them, hey, all right, well, first of all, let me go back to the non-conscious. The first thing you have to address is lineage, right? And what lineage trauma could be triggered through your bloodline. We're going to assess that first, right? So we know if we go through our subconscious programming and we get to a certain point in our life and we hit a trauma pocket, right, that triggers that lineage. At least you understand that before you get there. Does that make sense? And when you understand that before you get there, right, we start to realign humanity in the right way. Because how many people are married that shouldn't be married? Because they weren't in the right direction for their relationships. So if you started creating that balance, this is where the 3rd part of law of attraction comes into play. And that's a big thing for me. I don't know. What do you think about that? Have you ever heard it put in that context?
No, I haven't. I think that I agree with everything that you said. And still, I think that even when things are predetermined, there is always the possibility to change that trajectory, because we have the whole equipment, so to speak, that we need, which is our mind and how it is, expressed through the body and the brain specifically. We have all the equipment that we need in order to change completely the trajectory of our life and completely change timelines from those lineages and whatever can be triggered on them. Those traumas or those predetermined trajectories can serve as tools, as opportunities, receive learnings. So those upgrades can be made if one masters their instrument to create.
Yeah. The biggest creatives, like I've talked to people, and sometimes, like if I talk to somebody and I want to dial in, I can tell them who they are from a distance, wherever. I can tell them who they are if I just dive in. I can tell them who they are. I talked to an artist who's an artist, and I could tell that he was blown out, right? Some artists' sensibilities are so magnified. They're so open. They're so magnified. There's no protection. When you have a very strong person that has these high sensitivities, and this guy was in a normal family, good family, but because he was so blown out and has had high sensitivities, he was looked at in Western society as being different. So what that does to your psyche, and you have a defiance there, is he was so open that he went so far, he perpetuated such a negative darkness, right, through his art, because art comes from the darkest places. He went to the bottom because he was so open, and it was such a big contrast to go the opposite direction than his normal family, right? He created this huge contrast, and now he's this dark person that was probably a light, right, that didn't understand his sensibilities. And now he's this dark person that's drawing these weird dark figures because that's the way he went, because of his family pointing him out and saying he's different. That, to me, is never looked at the right way, right? So from your perspective, how would you help this guy with this blown out, creative, went completely the opposite direction of how he grew up, created this darkness? That's where his art comes from. How do you help that person?
Firstly, this person needs to be must want to be helped in order for me or anyone to be able to help him.
Yeah.
That's important to say first. The desire is the most important thing. The desire for anything. Desire is life-seeking expression. It is that what you said before, that, you felt like you were pushed to what you're doing today. And, and I shared a similar experience. That's the desire that is really life, or the soul, if you will, seeking expression. And so if there isn't the desire to be helped and to be, healed or transformed or in some way, then that cannot be done. But assuming that this person has that desire, I would first serve as the reminder of their truth, of who they really are. That's always, always, always the starting point for me. This person, even though, everything that you've, described about this person, he is a spiritual being. And as a spiritual being, he is not his family. He is not his story. He is not his darkness. He's not his art. He's not his feelings. He's not any of that. He's a spiritual being. He is infinite being with the highest frequency. And so I would start and continue with this reminding process, remembering, coming back to this awareness of who he truly is. And from there, really connecting to this feeling of desire, of wanting, and not from a place of need, but from a place of want, of pure desire. And really allowing or encouraging one to allow themselves to feel that. Because when the desire is strong, then any programming can be changed and shifted. But the desire has to be strong, because the programming is so strong and it has almost complete control of the instrument, which means all the thoughts that we think, all the emotional reactions, all those pattern behaviors and everything that we create. And so the programming is so strong and it feels so natural, right? Like for this person, probably this trajectory and this way of living and creating feels like the most natural thing. This is just who he is, quote unquote. So the desire has to be really ignited and encouraged, because that's the only way to override the programming and start shifting it. And I would educate them on, again, the truth of who they are and the instrument that they have. I call it sometimes the human instrument, because we are spiritual beings, and this human beingness is an instrument that life expresses itself through. And it's an instrument, the mind, the conscious mind, that allows us to form thoughts and to tune into frequencies and to create new forms.
There, I like that analogy of instrument, because I'm very rational too.
Yeah.
That's kind of a way to showcase this. That's pretty good. I've never heard that, but you can go ahead. I just want to interject that. That's something I will remember.
Good. I'm happy to hear that. Thank you for saying that. Yes, I use that a lot. I guess also this connects back to one of your first questions about, going hand in hand, right? The music and what I do today. I use a lot of analogies from the music, my musical experience, if you will, when it comes to playing an instrument, when it comes to master one's instrument so you can create whatever experience that you desire is a skill. It's a skill, just like playing a musical instrument is a skill or any other skill. So you can develop it through practice. And that's what this is. We are a human instrument, or we have rather a human instrument, as spiritual beings. We have a human instrument through which we can express and are called forth to express life and then experience it. But we don't know how to use the instrument. We use it all the time, but we don't really know what we're doing. because we've never been taught. It's like when I first picked up the flute, I was already almost in my 20s. So I didn't start it in a very young age. I started later in life. I mean, relatively late for one to become a professional musician. And so I taught myself, and I had these beautiful ideas of melodies and, sound that I wanted to produce through the flute. But all I could hear was at first, because flute is not like a guitar or a piano that you just touch and it can make a beautiful sound, right? Nothing comes out. And so it's the same thing, right? We have this instrument, we use it, but what we have in our mind, the idea is not audible, is not perceived in the physical in a way that we can see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, touch it, because we don't master the instrument that we've been given. Mm-hmm. And so first, just to understand that understanding is the key to freedom, because that is what allows us to take the seat of the observer and create a little gap between us as an awareness and us as the experiencer of life. And from that little gap, we can start making new choices. And that's the skill. And there are different, and then back to your question, how I would help this person, I would then, give him different ways to practice the skill. So they can then get up on the stage of life and perform and create what they truly desire, and not by default because of the lineage and the sensitivity and
is that kind of your foundation of what you do?
You could say that,
saying,
yeah.
Hey, you're kind of isolating your brain, if you will, and saying, hey, this is how we're going to move the needle in your brain to make you understand your instrument. I like that. Is that kind of it?
It's part of it.
Now, did you, a lot of people in our position, did you go to the darkest places? Did you go to the bottom? Did you have any experiences that made you see the dark?
Of course, several times. And each time I did, it was manifesting in my health, in my physical body. I reached that extreme mostly twice. One was early on. I was still in my late 20s, and pattern was more around relationships, right? And I would, go into another relationship and give another 2, 3, 4, 5 years with the wrong people becoming partners. Thankfully, I didn't have any children with any of these great people, but not the right match for me. And it was a pattern, right? And even though I already was aware, okay, there's a pattern here, I need to shift that. This is something I need to change. I couldn't. I just found myself every time making the same choices, right? That's how it is. And then the lesson knocked, in Hebrew, the word lesson and the word gate come from the same root, same 3-letter root. So, when you finally open the gate, you learn the lesson, you can open the gate, and it keeps knocking on your door, right? Those lessons that we have to learn. And so it knocked on the door again, but this time with, first it was just an intuition that something is wrong, and with my cervix, or like that I have to go to the gynecologist to check. I didn't know what. It was just an intuitive impulse. So I did, and I discovered that I had pre-cancerous lesions in my cervix to a point where it was like, okay, we have to do something about this right now. I wanted to do something, but not what the doctor advised, because it was clear to me that if I would just, remove it and do the procedure, I wouldn't open the gate. I wouldn't learn the lesson, and I will get another knock on that door. And so that took me very deep into a healing journey. And it was life-changing. Not only did I heal my body, so it was one of those great stories. I went back to the doctor a few months after, and they were amazed to see that nothing is there, and they didn't know how come, So not only that, but I also shifted that pattern in relationships. And very shortly after, the man who is now my husband for many years and the father of my son came into my life, and I was able to make new choices. I became a mom shortly after that. And then later on in life, more than a decade after, when I was already doing what I do today, what I'm doing today, and I was already in business, I worked very, very hard in my first year in business. And I basically was still operating on an outdated programming for success. That is founded on the belief of, you have to grind, you have to work very hard, you have to sacrifice. Success or money comes with a cost and all of that. and it manifested in my body again. And I completely burned out, but really very, very bad. And I had a very terrible skin condition that left scars till this day. And that was a very dark place. I was so miserable. Yeah. But again, that was another knock on the door that allowed me to step into more.
Well, the best healers have to go through that.
Yeah.
I think, to understand things. Because sometimes stuff will pop in my head. And because I've dealt with low-level entities before in humans, ironically, we won't get into that. But low-level energy survives off fear. Get rid of fear, you get rid of trauma. What do you think about those statements?
I agree. Fear is the opposite of love. It's the darkness that is the opposite of light. The trauma creates a fear response, right? Because we need to survive. We needed to survive some sort of an experience. It's ingrained in our neurocircuitry, in our cells, in our field, and we keep reliving that same reaction, and we keep being in that survival mode, even though that experience is past, and we're not in the same environment, we're not in the same conditions, and we don't need to continue surviving. We keep on doing that, and we live in fear as a result. So I really agree with what you said.
We got a lot of work to do, because I had this rationale. Being in entertainment, Netflix has a worldly algorithm, and they use that algorithm to determine what content they produce.
Mm-hmm.
And I made a statement. I said, I bet you Netflix is programming 70% dark. And I think it was actually more than that. If you understand that, you understand the psychology of humanity, and an entity that has programming around the world has a 70% plus dark response, because that's what people like.
People are addicted to it. That's the thing also, that the hormones that our brain produces and our body produces in the fear response or reaction are highly addictive. It's literally just inner pharmacy going on, and the body just needs another hit and another hit of these substances, just like it would with external substances. And so people consume that.
I think that the instrument thing is a very big deal and different than what I've seen. Maybe we'll run into each other one day. I'm trying to get out and speak to people and talk to people and just try to educate them more of how social media, a lot of people don't realize that social media emulates human behavior. And the only thing it offsets in a social media app is the algorithm, which creates balance based on the agenda of the app. And there's a lot of understanding there. If people understood that they were emulating human behavior, and how actually you can utilize that information on social media, if it's looked at the right way, you can utilize that the right way and understand law of attraction better.
Absolutely.
Because I can use content to show how the quantum field works. Because you don't have to sell people anything if you just convey the right message. People will be attracted to it naturally. I think it was a great conversation. Hopefully people can learn from this conversation.
Absolutely. That is my intention and wish. Thank you so much. I enjoy the conversation immensely. I suppose I would love to invite your audience, if they want to connect with me, they are most welcome. You can find me on Instagram, Shimrit Nativ, in the notes of your episode. So you can send me a message if you want to experience a meditation. You can send me a message, specifically the word energy, and I would love to send you a link to a free meditation that is beautifully related to the conversation that unraveled today, speaking of the quantum field and moving energy and using your instrument to create. And so you're most welcome to send me a DM on Instagram, and I would love to connect and share with you some beautiful tools.
Awesome. Well, this has been Shimrit Natif. I think she's the real deal. She's an authentic source. So if you're looking for someone in her space, you're definitely going to get some authenticity there. But I appreciate you coming on the show. My name is John Edmonds Cosma, CEO of Bang Productions, owner of the TikTok Live Creator Network Agency, and host of the Unimpressed podcast. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.